Well, is capping credit card interest rates to 10% or going after the people who are price gouging? Which one is more important? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, if you have a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com. Send a question into the Ask Bob section. Just go to the top of the front page. There's a link. It goes straight through. And if you need a little bit more time than shooting me an email, if it's a little bit, but there's some more moving parts than an email will take care of, feel free to go to my calendar and request for a time. And we'll have a short phone call and get you squared away. Do all this to make sure that prudentmoney.com is a trusted resource for you to go to, really in an environment where there's not very many choices to get help. And it's interesting as we look at all the regulation that's coming down on my business and how that a lot of that individual one-on-one investment and financial planning, it'll still be here for people who have the means to pay to and the number of assets that brokerage companies are looking for. But beyond that, the everyday American, which is most of us, won't have access to that. And so we want to make sure that we bring that to you in form of the Prudent Money Radio Show, the website, and the podcast, which is just a recording of the radio show. That way, if you ever miss it, you can go and listen to it. It is posted on wherever you like to consume podcasts. So let's talk a little bit about what Vice President Harris, no, this is not going to be a political statement of either candidate, just showing you, giving you an idea of some of the things that they're wanting to do, clarifying them a bit. One of the really big problems for politicians going into this particular this election, is that they've got probably the one biggest economic problem is something that politicians can't just come in and fix without a potentially very ugly downside to it. And of course, the problem of today, and the people in Washington are doing their best to smooth all this out and control the optic and control the interest rates, when really they should probably be raising interest rates, not lowering interest rates. But they're doing their best to come across as we're going to do this to solve the problem. So I've been very interested in what this quote unquote looks like. So Vice President Harris came out and said they were going to go after the price gougers and the people who are taking advantage of this situation. Probably very little of that occurring because it's monitored on the state level, and typically you don't see price gouging unless you see a short-term crisis start to build. So that, although has some quality sound bites, I don't think that that's going to be something that they're going to be able to pull off. Besides, the really big problem of all this is that, is twofold. Number one, inflation is just hanging on there. It's a little bit stabilized. And but one thing could set the interest rate, could set the inflation that we're seeing in this country a lot higher again. And we're going to talk about one of those here in just a minute. But the biggest problem with going after, now I guess this would be a little bit different, going after people who are price gouging, because that's if they find that. And I'm sure there is somewhere some people doing this. Very little, though, at the max. They would specifically go after them. But if they started going after an industry, what you're doing is you're putting price controls down. And this was something that the Biden administration, I think, did mention at some point, is to control inflation by forcing companies to put a cap on the prices that they can pay. Now, it does sound good, doesn't it? But there is an extreme downside to price controls, very dangerous long term, because at the end of the day, it's the government interfering in the free market system, which they do that in other ways. But anyway, that's beside the point. But it's more of what could become acceptable, and the kind of price gouging she's looking for is more of a long term. You can see a lack of quality in products, a lack of production, all the types of things that can tip the balance between supply and demand. Remember, inflation is a supply and demand issue. You get a lot of inflation when you have limited supply and great demand, like we saw that with the housing shortage, because there was a limited amount of supply and there's a great demand. So that's the thing I don't really, I mean, I'm glad to see that things are somewhat under control as far as the balance of supply and demand and the balance of inflation. At the same time, I'm not naive to the fact, nor are you, that could spring back into action and we could start seeing more inflation again. So that's where we really have got to be careful as far as this goes. Okay, so that's what Vice President Harris, that was her idea there, or someone's idea over there. They came up with this to make us feel better about inflation. Then there's Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump. He wants to put a 10% temporary cap on interest rates. Now, in guessing what the temporary means, that could mean one of two things. If for those that have a lot of credit card debt and a lot of interest, that all of your payment goes to pay the principal down for a certain period of time. That's almost kind of like COVID pushing money out to people. It has that COVID ring to it, because it's not anything that's going to solve the problem, just temporarily, because that will put cash in everybody's pockets that has debt, and or that gives them the opportunity to pay down more. So the thing about the 10% temporary cap that he wants to put in place, the biggest problem that I see with that is that, in a way, that is price controls as well. He's telling an industry how he wants to control prices, whether it be temporarily or long-term effect. But that is what that is, which is price controls. And I think whether it's Republican or Democrat, Libertarian, whomever, we don't want to go down that road. However, I do believe that just hearing the word credit card interest is a good thing. And maybe they'll get motivated to do something about a real big problem that, unfortunately, I think is going to take care of itself with the amount of defaults that could occur and problems that could occur by being under so much debt. But here's the thing. I've talked about this for covering credit card debt and writing a book on it for decades now. And there's only one way that you're going to fix this problem, and it's going to be through an act of Congress. Congress is going to have to sit down and figure this out. Now, this has a lot of moving parts to it, and Congress has tried many, many times to pass an act. They've passed some legislation to control credit card debt. Now, the last time that they went and they passed legislation was the Card Act in 2009, and President Obama signed that into law in May of 2009. But it didn't go into effect for another 18 months, which to me was the biggest saving grace that he gave credit card companies. In other words, he said, we're about to come down on you, but you got 18 months to do whatever you want to your customers. That's basically what he said, or that's what the action said. So I remember I had included what happened with the Card Act in 2009. I included that into my book. And so I studied it, researched it, read it from back to cover, believe it or not. And I can't put my finger on it, but the biggest problem that I see is that we're just to change the terms and what they mean and what they do. And the credit card companies are just abusing people almost more so than they were before the act went into a law. I mean, it's the darndest thing. So, at the end of the day, you got to look at politics and the big banks and the big financial institutions and the part that they play in keeping politicians elected. I've always said this, and I've seen this any time that they pass legislation. That is, the politicians, whomever they are, quote unquote, punishing for the good of the country, corporate companies, whomever, they always leave them a way out, a back door, some kind of back door that will make all this okay. And that's what they did with the Card Act 2009. I may dig back through that sometime and talk a little bit more about it just out of interest. But hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Hey, listen, we are up against a break. Stick around. I'll be right back. Hi, my name is Bob Brooks, host of the Prudent Money Radio Show. So let me ask you a question. Do you know your numbers? Now, which numbers are those? They are your retirement numbers. That set of numbers is the single most important planning numbers you can know. Yet the majority of Americans don't even know them. Prudent Money Financial Services, sponsor of the Prudent Money Radio Show, specializes in figuring out those numbers and creating a game plan to make sure you're on the right track. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show weekdays at 3 p.m. on Bible School Radio 91.3.
Hi, I'm Jill Taylor, inviting you to join me each Saturday morning at 11 o'clock for Choose Life Radio. You'll hear people from across America sharing their stories of faith, forgiveness, redemption, and restoration. Choose Life Radio will encourage you to fully appreciate the gift of life. You may also find help for you or a friend in need. So please join me Saturday mornings at 11 o'clock right here on Bible School Radio 91.3.
Dynamic, practical, life-changing.
There's no point in going to church and not letting the Christ who gave birth to the church on the day of Pentecost change your life.
Join us each day as Pastor Paul Shepherd applies the timeless truth of Scripture to everyday life. It's Destined for Victory on this great station.
Weekday afternoons at 3:30 here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. So let me ask you a question. Do you feel good? And when I say good, I mean at peace at where your investments are right now. Because I think that what we've seen, of course, the markets have, for the most part, been good the last 2 or 3 months. But I think it's a warm-up, not to the market going way higher, but the other side. And that's why and I know we've been talking about this for a while and nothing's happened. At the same time, that doesn't mean that the environment is not still ripe for something happening. In fact, there's a strike that's about to launch. If I get to it, if we'll talk about it, if not, talk about it tomorrow afternoon. But there's a lot of things that are concerning. Make sure that you are okay with the risk that you're taking. It's almost kind of like, there's a hurricane coming your way. You're going to prep for it. It may miss you. It may not cause any problems at all, but then it may be a direct hit. So it's all about being ready. And if you need any help with that, you can always go to prudentmoney.com and shoot me an email. I can always give you an opinion or point you in the right direction. That's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Well, after going through and really researching some of these articles I came across, I can't. It made me sit down and think about what to do. What do you do with credit card debt if you are one of our representatives, Congress, the president? What is there that can be done? Because it's a very toxic situation. You've got credit card debt and what it does to each family. And I mean, it takes a chunk out of the monthly budget, especially if you've been accumulating a lot of it. I don't think, for most people, they keep that quiet. They don't talk about that. And for good reason. But I think it's a situation that is really having a very strong negative effect on families, and the fact that it's over $1 trillion. So we got a really big problem. You've got. Don't feel sorry for the credit card companies and the banks. I certainly don't. You've got them making money at one level. You're asking them to cut it to another level, or you're putting price control. And I don't like the whole idea of price controls. But there's got to be some way to move those interest rates down on credit cards. And, when you look at where they are, how high they are, and so what if the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates? He's not going to ever put a dent in, they're not going to put a dent in what's happening in the credit card space, that's for sure. But, they allowed it to get out of control. And the one thought that I had was, what if you rewarded people for more aggressive payments? So you gave them lower rates, and as long as they paid at this higher payment each month instead of the minimum, they got the lower rates. If they stopped, the rates went back up. I think you would have to meet. To avoid the whole idea of price controls, I think you'd have to really meet in the middle with credit card companies and Washington. But it's going to take Washington to fix it. No president can sit down and sign something and say that this is going to take care of it. At least I don't believe they can. I think since it's a federal issue, it has to go through Congress. But they are the ones to fix it. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. They're also the ones to fix Social Security, something else you probably don't want to hear. And there you have it. So how does credit card companies get away with high interest rates? The National Bank Act says banks only have to follow rate limits of the state where they're headquartered. Most credit card companies are headquartered in South Dakota, Delaware, or Utah, all of which have less restrictive lending rules. So, here's the thing, and I can't remember who the players were at the time that the company started moving. There's a great documentary on Netflix about this, I think. But when they started moving credit card companies to these various states that had very lenient lending rules, where they could go get away with the higher interest rates and everything, because it always goes back to where they're headquartered. So maybe you come down on those states, and but think about it. Those states are making a lot of money for housing those credit card companies, a whole lot of money. So I tell you, it's a mess for sure. And my hope for each and every one of you, if you do find yourself in a situation where you've got a lot of debt, now is the time to be working towards getting rid of it. And if you need any help with that, I did write a book called Deceptive Money, and you can go check that out on the website. And that takes you on a step-by-step process of really looking at what's real and what's not real, because what's not real is most of what the debt solutions companies would be doing to say this is what you have to do to get out of debt. And I give absolute 100% examples of the kind of things that you see with these debt consolidators, but I go through everything so that you can have a clear picture as to really what you're up against. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Today I wrote a blog. I would encourage you to go read it, because I think that it's a question. I address things when they come up a lot. And so this particular question that has come up a lot, and it's basically comes down to this. I'm saving a lot of money, putting a lot of money back into my 401k plan, and at the same time, I have a lot of debt. Should I stop paying the money into the retirement account and start focusing everything on the debt? And of course, one of the things I point out in the article is that the good news is that you can sit down with someone who is a financial advisor who does financial plans, and you could really put together a pretty solid game plan on how debt liquidation and saving can live under the same roof. That's the best way to say it. And you can get a lot more detail than what I'm going to do in this blog. But one of the things that I talk about is just kind of like the first rule of thumb: don't invest for the long term while the short term is not protected. If I had any advice at all to give to someone just getting out of college or high school, going into full-time work, you're out on your own, you're trying to balance a salary that maybe is a little bit lower than you'd like, or maybe it's okay, maybe it's fitting all your needs, but you're still trying to balance all that with being out on your own. And it's just so very important to make sure that you have an emergency account set up and properly funded. And there's nothing exciting about that. There's nothing that's going to make you run and check the balances every night. If there was a big day in the stock market, cash is cash and savings is savings. Pretty boring stuff. But the problem that I see is that just starting out, and really anywhere on the time cycle, I think it's important. Even if you are 5 years out for retirement, I would suggest it's important to build that emergency account. And most people, I would say, have done that and concentrated on, at least ones I've talked to, as they're heading towards retirement. But just make sure that you have a way, and you can get by with other things that you can use to substitute for an emergency fund if you need to. But if you're just starting out, it's so very important to make sure that you have your surprise cost taken care of, and to make sure that you are not going to put yourself in harm's way. It's very important. Now, what's the caveat to that? If you're fortunate enough to go into a company that the employer has an employer match, then that's definitely something that you want to make sure you take advantage of. So I would call it a balanced approach. Take the money that you owe the credit card debts, take the money that you're going to put back for retirement, and take out the amount of money each month that would be matched, given to you, free money, and invest that because that's turning away free money. So you want to take the free money, then everything else goes to build an emergency fund. And then you start working on the debt to make sure. And really, the best way to get out of debt is to not get into it. That's just so key. Living within your means. Tough to do, easier to talk about, but one of the most important things that you can do. So I wrote that blog. It's posted at prudentmoney.com. Go check it out and let me know your thoughts. This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.